My wife and her family plotted to steal millions by eliminating my prenup. She cheated on me while executing the plan. But that same prenup that humiliated me years ago became my perfect revenge and destroyed them all. I'm 35 years old. I run my own property management company in Denver, and honestly, I need to tell this story because I still can't believe how everything turned out. It's been like 6 months since my divorce was finalized, and when people ask me what happened, they don't know even half of the story. Because it wasn't just that my wife cheated on me. I mean, that's already bad enough. But the thing is, her entire family was involved in a plan to basically steal everything I had built. I guess I should start from the beginning. When I met Natalie like 12 years ago at a mutual friend's barbecue. I was 23 years old, working in it, making like $40,000 a year. Nothing special, but it was enough to live on. You know, I shared an apartment with 2 roommates and basically lived on ramen and coffee. Natalie showed up at that barbecue with a friend of hers, and honestly, she caught my attention immediately. She was an elementary school teacher, had that sweet and kind energy that some people have, and we talked all night about everything, from movies to our future plans. We started dating like a week later. And honestly, I thought I had found the person I was going to spend the rest of my life with. What I didn't know at that moment was where she really came from. Like 3 months into the relationship, Natalie invited me to dinner at her parents' house in Boulder, and when I got there, I was like, okay, this is different. The house was huge, had an incredible view of the mountains, and her father, Arthur, had like 3 luxury cars parked outside. Turns out Arthur owned several auto dealerships in the Denver and Boulder area, and her mother, Judith, had an expensive boutique in downtown Boulder. I mean, they weren't millionaires like you see in the movies, but they were definitely at a completely different economic level than mine. During that dinner, Arthur asked me what I did, and when I told him I worked in it, I saw how he exchanged a look with Judith. I didn't think much of it at that moment, but looking back, I should have seen it coming. Natalie and I got engaged like 2 years later, when I was 25, and honestly, I thought her parents were going to object or something. But no, they were super nice and congratulated me. We started planning the wedding, which, by the way, they insisted on paying for because they wanted something big and elegant, and I was like, well, great, because I had no way to afford what they wanted. But like 3 months before the wedding, Arthur called me to meet for coffee, just the two of us. He told me we needed to talk about some practical matters before the wedding, and I thought he meant where Natalie and I were going to live, or something like that. But no, he pulled out a folder with legal documents and said, Timothy, you understand we need to protect the family's assets, right? It was a prenuptial agreement. A very detailed prenup that basically said that if Natalie and I divorced, each of us would keep what we had brought into the marriage and what we had earned during the marriage separately. At that moment, I had nothing. Literally nothing but my 2010 Honda Civic and like $5,000 in savings. Natalie, on the other hand, had a trust fund that her grandparents had left her, plus a condo that her parents had bought her when she graduated from college, plus other investments that I didn't even understand. Arthur explained all this to me in a way that sounded reasonable, like he was protecting me too, but honestly, I felt humiliated. I felt like they were telling me I wasn't enough, that I was never going to be at their level, you know what I mean? But I signed the damn document. What else could I do? I loved Natalie, and she told me it was just a formality, that her parents had insisted on it but she didn't care, that she knew I loved her for who she was and not for her money. Judith also told me something similar, that it was just to protect Natalie because she had seen many cases of men who took advantage of women with good financial positions. So, I signed. We got married. And honestly, the first few years were good. We lived in Natalie's condo in Denver. I kept working in it, but had gotten a better position that paid like $60,000, and she kept teaching because she loved her job. We were happy, or at least I thought we were. What changed everything was a decision I made when I was like 28 years old. The tech startup where I worked was in its early stages, and they offered me stock options as part of my compensation. It wasn't much, like 3% of the company, but at that time the company wasn't worth anything, so basically it was worthless paper. Natalie asked me if I should accept the stock or ask for more salary, and I told her I was going to take a chance on the stock because I believed in the project. Her parents thought it was a stupid decision. Arthur literally laughed and said that startups are like lotteries and that it was better to have a secure salary. But I took the stock anyway. Like 3 years passed. I was 31, and the company was acquired by a big tech company. I'm not going to say exactly how much, but my stock was worth enough that suddenly I had more money than I had ever imagined in my life. I'm talking about several $1,000,000 after taxes. I quit my job, invested part of the money in real estate, and started my own property management company. In less than 2 years, the company was making serious profits, and I was easily making 10 times what I made before. Suddenly, the guy who had signed that humiliating prenup because he had nothing now had more money than Natalie's entire family combined. And that's when things got weird. Arthur started calling me often to ask me for investment advice. Judith asked me if I knew business opportunities to expand her boutique. And even Monica, Natalie's younger sister who was like 26 years old, asked me for help refinancing her house. I helped them when I could because, they were my in-laws. And I thought it was the right thing to do. But what really should have alerted me was when Arthur told me, "You should buy one of my dealerships. I can give you a good price." And when I told him I wasn't interested in that type of business, he got upset. He didn't say anything directly, but you could feel the tension. Everything exploded. When Natalie and I had been married for like 9 years, I was 34. We were having dinner at her parents' house. It was a normal Sunday, and suddenly Arthur says, "Timothy, we need to talk about that prenuptial agreement you signed years ago." I was like, "Okay, what about it?" And he starts with this speech about how the prenup doesn't make sense anymore, that circumstances have changed drastically, that we're now a united family, and that document only creates division. Judith joins in and says it's ridiculous that after 9 years of happy marriage, we still have this legal paper separating our finances. Natalie is sitting there looking at her plate, not saying anything. I told them the prenup was fine as it was, that I didn't see a reason to change it. Arthur got serious and said, "But don't you trust our daughter? Don't you trust this family?" And I responded, "It's not about trust. It's simply that I don't see the need to change something we both agreed to before getting married." Judith then says something that sounded super fake to me, that Natalie feels hurt by the prenup, that she feels I don't see her as a true partner in my life. I looked at Natalie and asked her directly, "Is that true?" And she finally spoke and said, "Well, yes. Sometimes I feel like we're not really a team, that everything is very separate." Dinner ended awkwardly, and we went home without resolving anything. But that was just the first conversation. During the next 3 months, it was constant. Natalie started bringing up the topic every week, saying that the prenup made her feel like I was planning to divorce her, that her friends thought it was weird that we still had that after so much time together. Arthur would call me to tell me we should have everything in common as a family, that he and Judith shared everything, and that's why their marriage had lasted 30 years. Judith sent me articles about successful marriages and how financial trust was key. It was basically a constant bombardment of manipulation, and honestly, I started to feel like the bad guy in the movie. Things reached a maximum point when I came home one Friday after work and found Natalie's entire family in my living room. Arthur, Judith, Monica, and even 2 uncles I barely knew. Natalie was sitting on the couch crying, and when I asked what the hell was going on, Arthur stood up and said, "It was an intervention. An intervention. Can you believe it?" Like I was an alcoholic or something. He told me that my refusal to dissolve the prenup was destroying my marriage and hurting his daughter, that he wasn't going to stand by, watching me ruin Natalie's life. The uncles started talking about the value of family. Judith was there with tissues consoling Natalie, and I stood in the entrance of my own house feeling like I was in an alternate dimension. I told everyone to get out of my house. Arthur refused and said they weren't leaving until I agreed to talk to a lawyer about dissolving the prenup. We started arguing. He was yelling at me that I was selfish and that I was using money to control his daughter. I was yelling at him to get out of my house before I called the police. Natalie was crying harder. Judith was telling me I was being cruel, and Monica was in the corner with a weird look on her face, like she didn't want to be there. I finally got them all out, literally pushed them toward the door and told them not to come back until they could behave like civilized people. That night, Natalie and I had the worst fight of our marriage. She screamed at me that I was a cold and calculating bastard, that I had never really trusted her, that her whole family was right about me. I screamed back that I couldn't believe she had organized that ridiculous ambush in our house, that if she really loved me, she wouldn't be pressuring me like this. She said that maybe we should separate if I couldn't really commit to our marriage. I told her maybe she was right. That night I slept in the guest room, and we basically didn't talk for the next few days. What happened next was what absolutely changed everything. Monica showed up at my office like a week after that horrible intervention. She asked me to talk in private, and when we closed my office door, she looked super nervous. She told me, "Timothy, I need to tell you something, and you're going to hate me for waiting so long, but I can't stay quiet anymore." My heart started beating fast because I knew that whatever she was going to say was going to be bad. And then she let it all out at once, like she had been rehearsing the speech. She told me that Natalie had been having an affair for like 6 months with another teacher from her school, that my in-laws knew about it, and that all this pressure about the prenup was because they were planning for Natalie to divorce me once we eliminated the agreement. I sat there processing what I had just heard. Monica kept talking. She told me she had discovered the affair by accident when she saw messages on Natalie's phone during a family gathering, that when she confronted her sister, Natalie admitted everything and begged her not to say anything. Apparently, Arthur and Judith weren't upset about the infidelity. They were upset because the prenup meant that Natalie wasn't going to receive anything from my money in the divorce. So they devised this plan to pressure me to eliminate the prenup, make it seem like it was eventually my idea, and then Natalie would ask for divorce and take half of everything. Monica told me she couldn't keep being part of that lie, that she had always liked me and that it wasn't fair what they were doing to anyone. I asked her why I should believe her, and she took out her phone and showed me screenshots of a WhatsApp conversation between Natalie and her mother where they basically discussed the plan. I could read messages where Judith was telling Natalie to stand firm, that I would eventually give in because I loved her, that they just needed a little more pressure. There was another message where Natalie told her mother she felt guilty about lying to me, and Judith responded that she shouldn't worry, that I had been lucky to marry her in the first place, and that they were just recovering what was fair. I felt physically sick reading those messages. Monica let me copy everything to my phone, and then she left. She told me her family would probably never speak to her again, but she had to do the right thing. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed at a hotel and hired the best divorce lawyer I could find. I showed him the screenshots, explained the whole prenup situation, and he basically told me I had a golden case. He advised me to get additional evidence of the infidelity before confronting Natalie, because although the screenshots were useful, we needed direct proof of the affair to strengthen the case. I hired a private investigator, and in less than 2 weeks, we had photos of Natalie and this guy, her teacher colleague named David, entering a hotel together, kissing in a restaurant parking lot, the whole package. I also reviewed our joint bank accounts and discovered strange charges at expensive restaurants and hotels that I didn't recognize. When I confronted our bank about these charges, they showed me that Natalie had been using our joint credit card to pay for these outings with her lover. She had literally been spending our money. Well, technically my money, because I was the one contributing to that account, on her dates with another man. The investigator also discovered that this David had his own set of problems. He was going through a divorce too, and apparently had told several friends that he had found someone with money who was going to solve all his financial problems. I mean, it wasn't even a genuine romance. The guy was only with Natalie because he thought she was rich. With all this evidence, my lawyer told me it was time to act. I came home one afternoon. Natalie was preparing dinner like nothing was wrong, and I put all the photos and bank documents on the kitchen table. She turned completely white. I told her, "I know everything. I know about David. I know about your parents' plan. I know you've all been lying to me for months." She tried to deny it at first, saying the photos didn't mean anything, that he was just a friend. But when I showed her the screenshots of the conversations with her mother, she completely broke down. She started crying and saying she never wanted to hurt anyone, that she had felt lonely because I worked a lot, that her parents had pressured her to follow the plan, even when she had doubts. I told her I didn't care about her excuses, that I had hired a lawyer and was going to file for divorce. She panicked and begged me to give her another chance, that she would end things with David immediately, that we'd go to couples therapy, anything. I just shook my head and told her I had waited too long for this conversation. Natalie then changed tactics and got furious, screamed at me that I had never been a good husband, that I had always been obsessed with work and money, that she deserved something better. I reminded her about the prenup she had wanted to eliminate so badly, and her face changed when she realized what that meant. She told me she would fight, that she'd get the best lawyer and wasn't going to let me keep everything just because she had made a mistake. Her lawyer couldn't do anything. With all the evidence of infidelity and the conversations where she and her family admitted the plan to manipulate me into eliminating the prenup, plus the prenup itself, which was completely legal and binding, the case was relatively simple. Colorado is a no-fault divorce state, but the evidence of adultery and financial fraud made the judge have no sympathy for Natalie. The prenup remained completely intact. She kept her original condo, which was now worth less because the market had dropped, her trust fund, which she had spent quite a bit during our marriage, and absolutely nothing of what I had built. My company, my properties, my investments, everything stayed with me. The divorce was finalized in like 6 months because she finally accepted there was no point in fighting. But wait, because it gets better. Turns out David, the teacher Natalie was having the affair with, thought she was the rich one in the marriage. When he found out about the divorce terms and that Natalie had basically ended up with no significant money, because remember, she only made a teacher's salary and her trust fund wasn't a big deal, the guy disappeared. Literally left her when she needed him most. And according to Monica, who still kept me informed even though her family no longer spoke to her, David sent Natalie a message saying he was also going through a difficult divorce and couldn't deal with more drama. I mean, the guy only wanted her money, and when he saw there was no money, he ran away. Arthur and Judith also faced their own consequences. Her boutique started having financial problems because it turns out Judith had been taking out loans, assuming they would eventually have access to my money through Natalie. Arthur's dealerships were also struggling because the car market had changed and he had made some bad investments. Basically, they had counted their chickens before they hatched, assuming the plan would work and they'd have access to my resources. When everything fell apart, they found themselves in a really difficult financial position. I'm not going to lie. I felt a deep satisfaction knowing their greed had led them to their own ruin. Like 2 months after the final divorce, Natalie showed up at my office. My assistant called me and told me my ex-wife was in the reception asking to speak with me, and honestly, my first instinct was to say no. But curiosity got the better of me, so I told her to let her through. Natalie came in looking destroyed. She had lost weight, had dark circles under her eyes, and looked like she hadn't slept well in weeks. She sat in front of my desk and started crying, saying she had made the worst mistake of her life, that she should never have listened to her parents, that she still loved me, and if we could try again. She told me she had been in therapy, that she had cut contact with her parents because she realized they had been a toxic influence, that she would do anything to get back what we had. I looked at her while she cried and felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. Maybe a little pity, but definitely not love. Not even anger anymore. I told her, Natalie, there is absolutely nothing you can say or do that will change what happened. You lied to me for months. You manipulated me along with your family. You were unfaithful to me, and you only cared when you realized you were going to lose the money. You didn't love me. You loved what you thought you could get from me. She kept crying and saying it wasn't true, but I had already called security. I asked her to leave and not contact me again. As security escorted her out, she yelled at me that I was going to regret it, that someday I would realize she had been the best thing that ever happened to me. I didn't bother to respond. Now I'm 35. My company keeps growing. I have more money than I need. And honestly, I'm fine. I haven't dated anyone seriously since the divorce, but I'm not rushing either. I've learned to enjoy my own company, not to trust so easily, and definitely to pay attention to the warning signs I ignored with Natalie and her family. Monica and I are still in touch. She ended up cutting ties with her parents too after all the drama, and sometimes we have coffee and update each other on our lives. She thanked me once for not blaming her for not telling me earlier about the affair, and I told her I understood why it had been difficult for her to betray her family like that. Sometimes I think about what it would have been like if I had simply dissolved that prenup. When they asked me to, I would have lost millions of dollars, my company, probably my mental health too. And all for what? For trusting people who only saw me as an ATM? The prenup that Arthur made me sign thinking he was putting me in my place, thinking he was reminding me that I would never be good enough for his daughter, ended up being exactly what saved me from losing everything. The irony is delicious. I'm not gonna lie. The last time I heard anything about Natalie was like 3 months ago. A mutual friend told me she had to sell her condo because she couldn't maintain the payments on just her teacher's salary, and that now she lives in a small rented apartment on the other side of town. Arthur had to close one of his dealerships, and Judith is working full-time at her boutique, which is barely staying afloat. I don't feel joy about their suffering, but I don't feel guilt either. They made their choices. I just protected what was mine. And that prenup they wanted to eliminate so badly ended up being the best decision someone else made for me.